Hey Wargamers, in the past couple of years, Games Workshop has done something that I think is really cool, and that is separate low point games from high point games, right? Treating low point games as their own thing and not having them fall inside the same quagmire that is large point games with all the different options and potential rule interactions, everything like that. They say, no, if you are just starting out or you're just looking for a condensed version of this game, we have a product and a rule set that is just for you. And so for 40k, that's Combat Patrol. In Age of Sigmar, that's Spearhead or Vanguard. And they have these, products that they can sell, of course, right? They're box sets, but they have bespoke rules on them, right? They have rules that are specific to and balanced within the context of different combat patrols. And this is really cool, right? If you just want something to figure out if, hey, is 40k for me or not, or just get a taste for a faction, these combat patrols are a really great way to do that. And they offer things for more experienced hobbyists in the form of a quick game or just a useful discounted product that you can get a little bit more bang for your buck through. And these are different than the Start Collecting boxes that came before. Start Collecting boxes in the past, yes, they offered you a discount, but they didn't have this attention to rule set or complementarity in the same way. And so Combat Patrol, I think, is a really great addition. And in the new edition of 40k, which is coming soon, right? Like we're getting to the point where Games Workshop is going to want to turn over into a new edition of 40k. That's just their business model. They're probably going to come out with a new Combat Patrol as well, right? And so what might that look like? Right now, we have this Combat Patrol. It's a Devilfish, it's a unit of Fire Warriors, it's a unit of Pathfinders, and it's a Commander. There are things that I think work really well about this, things that I think could work better about this, but nonetheless, that's the Combat Patrol we have. It markets for 168 US dollars, which is really $230 worth of value. So you get a nice discount right there, right? Like that's a good thing. But if we're thinking about what might come next, we can use these guidelines to try to figure out what might go into the Combat Patrol of the next edition of 40k. And Combat Patrol has been around long enough that this isn't the first version of the Tau Combat Patrol that we can look at. The predecessor to it had a strike team, had stealth suits, had ethereal, had a ghost skill in it, and between these two, we see a pattern starting to form. And this pattern applies to other combat patrols and other in other factions as well too, right? That we tend to have a battle line unit. In this case, we really just have the fire warriors. We have characters, we have a larger model, and then we have some other unit, right? So we can see those things present in both of the Tau combat patrols, and we see this format roughly play out in other factions as well. There's some variation where sometimes they put in 2 characters or something like that too, but more or less it's these 4 different units that are in the box, right? And so for Tau, we have a lot of options. For battle line, it's going to be the strike team or the breacher team, right? But it's the same kit, but they can choose to have one or the other be the way you're supposed to assemble it using the Combat Patrol rules, right? For the character, this is where we have kind of a little bit more flexibility, but we have things like the Ethereal, the Fireblade, the Commander is the current one, plus some other options. For the larger model, we have a few options that are reasonable, right? We're not going to see things like Storm Surges in this box, right? And we're not going to see Forge World in this box. We're not going to see Flyers in this box. So there's a few options, but things like the Devilfish, which is in the current kit, or the Ghost Skill, which is in the prior, Crisis Suits, which were in the old Start Collecting box, right? Those could be kind of your larger models maybe, and then some other unit, right? And here there are technically lots of options, but probably fewer than we think, just because a lot of them end up being pretty niche, pretty idiosyncratic in the way that you wouldn't necessarily want to include them in this box, right? And so in the past we've had things like Pathfinders or stealth suits, but there are a few other things that we can look at as well. So let's start by looking at those character options. The usual suspects are things like commanders, fireblades, ethereals. Amongst them, the commander is good, right? Like every army pretty much is going to have a commander. So having a commander in the kind of intro box like this is a good thing, but it doesn't synergize with anything other than crisis suits, really. So that's a weird thing about the current set, is that you have a commander in there, but it doesn't necessarily do that much. At least in the larger point games where you're going to be expanding into, the commander doesn't give you that much value with the composition that comes in the box, right? Something like a Fireblade, on the other hand, gives you way more value and would make the box more of a repeat purchase for more seasoned hobbyists. Even though it's geared at this more intro game, you could still pick it up as a more seasoned player and still get that repeat value. The Ethereal too could be used in combination with pretty much any any composition of a box, but you tend to not want a ton of Ethereals, right? Like you have one or two, but you don't need to buy a bunch of boxes of this. So the Ethereal is a very solid unit. It's a nice model. It totally makes sense for it to be in a box like this. But if Games Workshop wants to maybe sweeten the deal a little bit for repeat purchases, then maybe they don't include the Ethereal, or they stick you with the Ethereal and say, whatever. But the Ethereal has, definitely has value. It's just not something that you're going to have as much synergy with as you scale up. For other character options, we have a bunch of different Kroot characters, right? We have Shapers, we have Lone Spears. These are probably only going to show up in a Kroot-themed Combat Patrol, which seems unlikely. That's basically the hunting party box. So I'm guessing that they probably won't do that, right? Like if they wanted to have a Kroot-themed box, they would have it be its own thing. And I haven't really seen, competing combat patrols within a faction, right? So that seems like they could do that, but pretty unlikely, right? If they did do this, though, it almost guaranteed to be a Shaper, and this would be probably a case where we might see multiple Shapers. There's like a War Shaper and like a Trail Shaper. You could see both of those in a single box. Or you could see a Shaper and a Lone Spear, which would be fantastic, right? But it's probably going to take the place of one of the bigger models in that box, and it just seems really unlikely that you'd see a Lone Spear and a Shaper plus, things like Kroot and then some Carnivores in a box, because the value of the Lone Spear alone is so high. I think it probably inflates the net value of the box to the point where that Games Workshop wouldn't want to do it. So Kroot generally probably not going to be the main thing that we see a Combat Patrol box focused around. However, there is another option that is kind of a surprise contender, but I think makes a lot of sense. And that's the Firesight Marksman, right? The Firesight Marksman is an old model. It is not the oldest model in the Tau range, right? That honor belongs to the Devilfish and the Hammerhead, but it is pretty close, and notably one of the models that is not in plastic. So its head is on the chopping block, right? And it's either going to be a model that gets a new sculpt in the next edition, or it's going to be left to Legends, right? Let's assume that they make a new model for it, and they make a new model for it alongside a new codex, and you could have this in a Combat Patrol. That presents a really cool opportunity to have a new model in the Combat Patrol box as a way of making it look really cool and selling the product, right? This new fresh off the presses model inside the Combat Patrol seems really awesome, and as a functional unit, it's a standalone unit, right? It does its own thing. It provides benefits to the army as a whole, but it doesn't, interact in the same way like a Fireblade does, where it needs to be embedded in a unit of fire warriors to really get the value. So it's its own thing. It's a standalone unit, and it could do some cool things, especially if you go with more of a stealth theme for the combat patrol, if you go for a more stealth theme for the combat patrol, you could do a lot of cool things with the Firesight Marksman being in there. But even if you don't, having like a lone op character in the box could do a lot of really cool stuff. So I think the Firesight Marksman isn't an unreasonable expectation for the character slot in a new version of Combat Patrol. Hot take, I know. So if we have some unit of Fire Warriors and then a character, what's going to be our larger model? Well, there's a few options, right? We could go with vehicles or battle suits. Whichever one we go with, price is going to be the limitation. This is the big thing, right? Is that these big models, these big units tend to soak up a lot of your budget. And I think that puts a cap on some of these as being probably a bit too spendy for GW to consider putting them into a Combat Patrol box. So for vehicles, we could go with the Devilfish. That's what we have right now. Great value, especially if you had like a Fireblade and Breacher setup. Put it in the Devilfish. That's really solid value. That would be something that would be a great intro for the army, but also provide repeat purchasers with a lot of incentive to pick up the box. Basically, if you could pick up a box that had, a complete set of Devilfish, Breachers, and Fireblade all in one, that would be that'd sell like hotcakes, right? Alternatively, you could go with like a Hammerhead or a Skyray, which are old models and show their age, I think. Yes, it's the same chassis as the Devilfish, but I think the Hammerhead actually looks older than the Devilfish. I don't know why. I think it's because of the turret, and it has to be, right? But it's because of the turret and like the smooth surfaces on it. It just looks really dated compared to the Devilfish, which yes has many of the same parts, but all those parts are a little bit more detailed, or kind of more compact in a way that the flatness of it doesn't stick out as much to me for some reason. And so the Hammerhead, the Skyray, I think they look dated. I don't know if they would be a great selling part of this kit, just because I don't know if it would attract new people towards the army as much as something else would. It might also be too specialized, right? Like a Hammerhead with a railgun, just one shot. That probably isn't going to feel that great, and might not be very well balanced with the other combat patrols, right? The other combat patrols probably aren't going to have a whole lot that's going to be able to deal with, just a railgun shot to the face. So, yeah, maybe not. Piranha's also a vehicle, but they're so cheap that I don't think that they really fit in this larger model option. They're small, they're cheap. I just don't think that they really fit in this slot. So we'll talk about them later. For battle suits, Riptides, of course, would be awesome to get in this in a box that was $168, like a Riptide plus a bunch of other units. That'd be awesome. And holy crap, I didn't realize that it's been a while since I bought a Riptide when I was doing this. Riptides are $118 now. That's crazy. It's so expensive. $118 for a Riptide. And yeah, it just totally eats up your budget. That's half your budget for this thing, right? And they don't have a lot of synergy. They're cool, big models, but again, like the Riptide is also showing its age at this point. It's important to remember that the Riptide was one of like the first big models in plastic that GW did, right? They came out with that. They came out with the Wraith Knight, that sort of thing. And it also has a lot of big flat surfaces. It of course has the weak ankles, all that stuff, right? And like it was a huge leap forward at the time, but we've made even bigger leaps forward in sculpting and model production since then. And so it's expensive, it's a little old, it's a big model. I just don't think that that's very likely. Ghost Keel is $92 right now, but still that's that's still significantly cheaper than the Riptide. Super charismatic kit, something that we've already had in a combat patrol. Just really a really cool kit that you would think would make the product sell and do cool things on the tabletop. So I would say that it would almost for sure be the Ghost Kill if they hadn't already done that, right? I don't think they're going to go back. So that leaves us with the Broadside, which at $62 is a decent price and could balance really well if you went for a more mobile combat patrol, like if you had some more mobile elements in this. A Broadside could be really cool. You might even see, if you go with like a Devilfish and a Broadside, if you like double up on these larger models and then forget some other model, like that could make sense too. But yeah, Broadside could be a little bit more of an anchor and isn't as outside the realm of possibility as something like a Hammerhead for other combat patrols to deal with. But then you get crisis suits, right? And crisis suits haven't been in either of the past two combat patrols. They're iconic. They're a fresh kit. They're widely useful. They're gonna, you could build them as any of the three variants, but of course with the combat patrol, they'll give you a particular build to use. And yeah, that just seems like a really charismatic, marketable choice inside a combat patrol. You could have them build them as fire knives, for example. I don't think they would do Sunforge. I don't think they would do Star Scythe, just because you already have the Fire Warriors in there. So a unit of fire knives might be really interesting in a combat patrol like this. And so I would lean towards the crisis suit as being one of the things that maybe would be in a new version of a combat patrol. And so that leaves us with our fourth unit. What is that flare unit going to be? And so this is where there could be a lot of options, but really there aren't as many as we might hope, right? Like, it's not going to be Crude Hounds, right? It's not going to be Crude Hounds. Watch, it's going to be Crude Hounds. When this thing comes out, they'll have Crude Carnivores and Crude Hounds. But I doubt it. So less likely things like Pathfinders, right? Newer kit, useful rules, but they already did that. Piranhas, not very showy. They're cheap, right? They're cheap, so that might be a reason alone that Games Workshop brings in. But like they would be kind of an awkward inclusion in a combat patrol. They had the infiltration cadre a while ago. That was like Pathfinders and a Piranha. It was just kind of a weird box set, right? Like it was just kind of weird, like awkward. Like Piranhas are something that you get once you get your other bases kind of situated. I don't know if it would be one of the things that I would say, hey, new player, you should get a Piranha immediately. Right, so that's kind of weird. More likely, I think, are things like stealth suits, right? They offer a similar role to Pathfinders. They didn't include them in the last combat patrol. They're relatively cheap. They're battle suit, which if we don't have battle suits in the box, it's good to expose new players to battle suits. They'll want to do that. And so, yeah, it seems like you could do a lot with stealth suits in a combat patrol. But of course, Games Workshop also wants to showcase their new models, right? And so Vespid, Kroot, just like how they included the Pathfinders from the kill team in the current combat patrol, they could include the Vespid kill team here. I think that would be really cool. It offers some distinct rules, offer the new kit. They could do it with Kroot Carnivores or Firestalkers, either way. You could include either Kroot unit here and get about the same mileage, I think. And yeah, I think it's probably going to be one of those. My guess would be on Vespid, just because it is the combat patrol and they're so distinct from the Tau themselves, and they're not kind of veering into the Kroot realm, just because I just have this feeling that that they won't do that. So what's next? I think it's going to be something like this, right? I think it's going to be something that's about $240 worth of value, so we're right about on target. If we have a new fire site marksman, with or without drones, however they end up doing that. We'll see what they do with drones, right? Like, I don't know. But they'll have the fire site marksman model as the character. You'll have a unit of fire warriors, of course. You'll have a unit of crisis suits and a unit of Vespa. Like I said, that's about $240 worth of value that they could sell at whatever price point they're selling combat patrols at now. And so I think this is about the right amount of bang for your buck given the value of the current combat patrol, and does some cool stuff, right? You have some nice composition. You get exposed to different parts of the army, different themes of the army, and you could do some neat things with that. Am I totally off base here? Do you think this is reasonable? Do you think that it's totally insane? Let me know in the comments below. What would you like to see in a new combat patrol for Tau? Let's have a conversation about it. And as always, thanks for watching and happy wargaming.